again, forgive me, I'm going to stop here. Who are the Jews? They're the Jews. Is the church the Jews? No. Are the Jews the church? No. The Jews are the Jews, and they're not even under the old covenant anymore. They're under the new covenant. They still have the Abrahamic covenant, and God still has a purpose in them, and we'll read all about God's purpose that is coming to them in Romans chapter 11, and he will restore their land, and he will bless them, and there'll be some sort of work that happens in the life of the Jews as a nation. But this really interesting is this, in this section, in verse 17, and all the way through verse 24, he said, when he says you, when you, yourself, you, yourself, it's all singular. So why does that matter? Because he's speaking to the individual Jew, not just as a collective people, but to the individual, because righteousness is always an individual aspect. It's never a people. You don't go, well, I'm at church, so I just kind of like righteousness by proxy. But he's making the point here that you, if you say this, if you do that, not you, because you're not Jews, but to the Jews. Why say this? Because just like the last couple of verses, many times, people have come to this point and we swap for some reason, whether it's bad teaching or just, I don't know why it is, being subject to some weird thoughts. But as soon as we read Jew, we go, oh, that's us. That's me. Because they were God's people and now I'm God's people because I'm a Christian. No. Yes, you are God's people, but I don't know your descent. Most likely, you're not a Jew. And if you are a Jew and you got saved, then you're a Christian. And you're still not a Jew, except by lineage. So this is really important that we don't now adopt this and go, well, he said Jews, so that must mean me. No, he didn't say believers. He didn't say Christian. He's making the argument of condemnation against Jews. And this would be very difficult for them. Well, it is for anybody, but specifically the Jew. He says, for if you call yourself a Jew and rely on the law and boast in God and know his will and approve what is excellent because you are instructed from the law. So he says, if you are a Jew, call yourself a Jew, and you rely on the law and you boast in God, so you look at the law as your justification and you boast in who God is, means you exalt in or you appreciate God, and you know his will and approve what is excellent. Approve what is excellent literally means if you've observed, measured, and accepted. It's a process. It doesn't mean just like you went like, oh yeah, okay. But no, it's the idea that you observed it, you processed it, and you came out and said, yes, this is the truth. So he says, if you know his will, approve what is excellent, because you are instructed from the law, and if you are sure that you yourself are a guide to the blind, light to those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of children, having in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth, you then who teach others, do you not teach yourself? While you preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that one must not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law, you who boast in the law, dishonor God by breaking the law. For as is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. So he's making the point. Do you remember there's multiple times where Jesus is speaking to the Jews, and that would have been about 50, 60 years before this is written. He's speaking to the Jews, and he says something like, they tell him, hey, we're sons of Abraham. So we're good. We're sons of Abraham. And he says, well, God is able of these stones to raise up sons of Abraham. And the point they're making is, one point they're making, they're actually insulting Jesus because they're saying, you don't know who your dad is. We know who our dad is. So they're insulting the fact that his father is the Holy Spirit. So they don't believe the thing with Joseph and Mary and all that. So they're insulting him in that way. But the second part of it is they're saying we're good with God because our identity is that seminally we're from Abraham. So we're good. They're saying because of proximity to Abraham and lineage that we're fine. So this is a regular belief in the Jewish system. You were born a Jew, you're gold-plated. You're going to be fine. Everything's going to be okay. And so Paul is saying, look, that's not how this really works. And that's what he's talking about. And so he's saying if you esteem yourself as all these things, He's not saying every Jew, because there were definitely Jews that trusted Christ in a way that they should, the Jews that came to Christ, and even in the Old Testament, in the Old Covenant, there were Jews that were by faith righteous by God, and they were following the law and giving sacrifice when they couldn't. They looked forward to the Messiah coming. There were faithful Jews, not very many, which is a side note. If you remember, all the way back to when Elijah calls down fire from heaven, and the prophets of Baal, it's like the showdown at the Israel Corral or something, and they basically, after the prophets of Baal failed to call fire, and then Elijah does call fire down, the Israelis get all amped, and they kill all the prophets of Baal, like 450 prophets. And the next day, Elijah is running for his life because Jezebel basically sends him a note that says, hey, I'm going to do that to you by tomorrow. And so he bounces out and says, no, I don't want that to happen. And so he runs away. And it's funny because, it's not funny. It is funny. It shouldn't be. But he runs to be under a juniper bush. And he says, oh, God, just kill me because I'm just like my fathers. There's no one but me. And the encouragement that God gives him, besides, feeding with crows and whatnot, but the encouragement that God gives him is he says, don't worry. There's 7,000 of my people that haven't bowed the knee to Baal. And you're like, wow, that's so cool. That's encouraging. 7,000 out of about 3 million. Yeah, not so encouraging. 3 million Jews, and God tells him 7,000 haven't bowed the knee to Baal. I don't know what that percentage is because it feels like there's a lot of zeros behind the decimal point, but that's not a big percentage. So it's just kind of, it's a remnant. There's a remnant of people that are following him. So there are people that they're Jews that aren't like this. They don't esteem themselves as a teacher of everybody and a know-it-all and these type of things. But he says, if that's who you are as a Jew, if you're walking and you think, well, because I'm a Jew and because I have the law and I approve the law and I do this and I do that, I'm golden. He's saying, no, not at all. That's not at all how this works. And he says, and he quotes, and he's making the point that this has always been happening because he quotes from Isaiah there in verse 24, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. So he's driving this point in, and he's saying, no, it's always been this way. There's always been those of you who have relied on your Judaism rather than looking to God. And it's not a path of justification before God. He's going to push it even farther. And he says, for circumcision indeed is of value if you obey the law. But if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. So if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision? And he's making the point about circumcision because one of the things that Jews, obviously, from the New Testament, if you're familiar with it, they trusted in their circumcision. Hey, our dad's circumcised. He's the kind of the patriarch of the family. All the boys are circumcised. We had it done on the 8th day. The priest did it, blah, blah, blah. And they said, because of this circumcision, this is the token that we're right with God, that we're good Jews. Our family are good Jews. We're right with God. And now Paul and for us, we're like, okay, we probably understand the concept, but it's actually, I'm not saying he's trying to offend the Jews, but he's really pushing it in because it would really, our English is really nice about it. He says, for circumcision indeed is of value if obey the law, but if you break the law, literally says your circumcision becomes a foreskin. So why is that insulting? Because Jews looked at Gentiles, people with foreskins, and they were disgusted with them. They absolutely rejected that God would have anything to do with them at all, that they were fuel for the fire of hell. So when Paul says to them, if you're circumcised, but you're not you're not looking to honor God, if we could put it that way, he says you're basically a Gentile. That's what he's saying. You go, well, how do you know that? Because he does it again in verse 26. For if a man who is uncircumcised, again, this is our fancy English. Paul literally says, for if a foreskin keeps the law. That's what it says. He's using a Jewish slang for Gentiles. They literally just called them foreskins. And so he's saying if a foreskin keeps the law, to God, that's a person as if he's circumcised. So he's literally telling Jews here, who he himself, remember, he's not trying to be rude, he's not trying to be crude, he's trying to get through to them in their own language with their own slang. As someone whose testimony is, remember Paul's testimony is, I would go to hell myself. I would be accursed. Paul says, if it means my brethren, the Jews, could be saved. So this isn't out of spite or anger or anything, and we're not trying to be inappropriate this morning. We're just saying this is what the scripture says, and here's the idea. Paul is saying if you're a Jew and you think the law will save you, and you think that you can just do whatever you want because you have a snippety snip, you're wrong. And not only that, if you break the law, and you're exactly like somebody who is you are a Gentile. And let me tell you this, he says, if a Gentile is looking to honor God in his life through the law, that person is like a Jew. Remember every single time Jesus ever complimented a Gentile? The Jews tried to kill him. They went ape. They couldn't handle it. So we're just reading this like, well, yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. But any Jew that gets a hold of the letter to the Romans, it would be infuriating. Are you kidding me right now? This can't be. Is he trying to infuriate people? No, he's trying to demonstrate the stark reality of our condition.